You're listening to the Trailblazers podcast, episode 49, with Bryce Fluellen.
You're listening to the Trailblazers podcast, where we will explore the stories of successful Black professionals. Join us as we highlight the knowledge, resources, and tools of these accomplished trailblazers to help provide the know-how, confidence, and motivation you need to blaze your trail. And now, here's your host, Stephen Hart.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Trailblazers podcast. Today's episode is being published on the first Monday of January in 2017. With that, I'd love to, wish you all a happy new year and extend a wish for abundance and positivity, for courage and hope, for encouragement and humility. Let's come together and work together as one this year to make it a great year. Right? Let's not invest in hatred any longer, but in all things, in all situations, let's choose love and let's rise up and go beyond this year. I know that you are important. You're important to God. You are important to those all around you in your marriage, your kids, your family, your friends, your church, your co-workers, and your community. And if 2016 was somehow a failure, I'm going to encourage you to acknowledge it as such and begin right now, wherever you are, to find the gold in those failures. Try to understand what went wrong and why, and know that there's something there that you can learn from. I want you to be determined, though, to move on from it. In 2017, do not allow yourself to get distracted. Focus on the goals that you have set and focus on the priorities in your life and pursue them with all that you've got. I think today's guest will help us all to see these principles in action. His name is Chef Bryce Fluellen, and for over 20 years, Chef Bryce has utilized his culinary skills to make a significant impact in the community. As a past director of operations for Magic Johnson Enterprises, he was responsible for the company's growth in underserved urban areas all across the country. And today he serves as the first chef hired by the American Heart Association LA to run Kids Teens Cook with Heart, which is a healthy cooking and nutrition program that has positively impacted over 1,000 children and adults throughout Los Angeles County. Bryce has a new book that just launched, and I'm so very happy for us to discuss that on today's episode a bit, among many other things. So I encourage you to grab a copy of his book after you get off of today's episode. The link will be on our show notes page at TB Pod, along with some other great goodies. Now let's get set to go ahead and dive into today's episode with our very first trailblazer of 2017, Chef Bryce Fluellen. Enjoy. Bryce, welcome and thanks for being our very first chef on the podcast.
I'm honored. I'm honored. I've been listening to your podcast, and it's been educating me and empowering me. And this is something that is definitely, every time I listen to one of your guests, I learn something new and different in a different perspective. So I'm honored to be on here.
Nice. So Bryce, as you know, one of the first things we like to touch on a bit is really to start the episode from a place of gratitude, right?
Yes,
and
yes.
So, I'd love for you to share, what you're most grateful for in your life right now.
Yeah, right now, I'm grateful for a couple of things. One is my health. I always say that, health is wealth, and a lot of the goals and dreams and visions that we have, and a lot of the guests that your guests have spoke about, you can't do that if you don't have your health. So first and foremost, I'm really, grateful for that. I'm also blessed to have an amazing family, a wife and kids who, I'm extremely proud of, and they keep me going and make me a better person. And then lastly, just the privilege to be on a show like this and, have someone, listen to my journey and even find it interesting enough to listen to. A lot of people go through life, nobody may be interested in what you have to say outside of your family. And even sometimes they don't want to hear it. So I think it's a privilege. I think it's a privilege. People look at a privilege for someone to want to, talk to you and hear about your story.
Right. I'd love for us to really kind of get started in our talk with having you just tell us a little bit about the Bryce we don't see on your website or in the media. Maybe share a little bit about what it is that you actually do in your day to day.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Stephen. I am blessed and extremely honored and grateful to, I work with kids every day, pretty much every day of the week, and empowering children and families as well, but primarily children all the way from 8 to 18 to teaching them how to lead a healthy lifestyle through food. So, I've been able to work with, approaching almost 1,500 kids over the last few years. And so, primarily on my day-to-day, I am in schools, Los Angeles Unified, Long Beach Unified, and teaching young people not only basic cooking skills and nutritional education, but all the things that come along with that when we're in a classroom. So, for instance, using that platform is for them to learn about how to work with other people. Because usually classes are anywhere from 20 to 30 kids. So kids are, the residual of it. They learn how to work in a team and be able to articulate thoughts and work with people that you may not have the same viewpoint, and how to actually do that, to be productive. Also, there's, math in there as well. So you're talking about different learning platforms, kids and adults, we all learn differently. So sometimes, I can use food as a tool for something as simple as, how many ounces go into a cup? Oh, 8 ounces. Well, how many in 2 cups? And, that's a word problem for some kids that they may not have grasped in the classroom.
Right.
And we talk about history as well. There's so much food history tied into food.
Right.
So, I am extremely grateful and, just passionate about what I do, because I look at it as something that, no pun intended, but planting a seed in young people for them to understand and develop habits that, can last them a lifetime. So, they can actually, change some of the traditions that, in some of the communities that I work at, there's a tradition of, unhealthiness, people dying early from preventable diseases. So, I look at my work as something that hopefully 10, even 20 years from now, that'll start to change. And I'm blessed to be a part of that.
Yes. I have a 6-year-old who loves to bake. She loves the kitchen. But I never thought about educational impact in that light.
You never know how you can impact a child, or what's actually a child is going to gravitate to. And all kids learn differently.
Yes.
The model of just sitting down, listening to somebody is okay, but that's, even adults have a hard time. You can sit down and listen to somebody all day. So if you can have another space where kids can, learn, and you can throw in something differently, or they can see it from a different perspective,
right?
That's something that can also help them in the classroom and other areas. So I always look at it from that standpoint as well.
Bryce, what really ignited the spark for you to become a chef? Where did this all begin?
That's a great question. I'll try to keep it short, as I can. I started in the front of the house of the business. I was in college at Howard in DC, and I had a friend who came by actually one day when I was just chilling out on the couch, and he said, I'm working at this restaurant. We make a lot of tips, and he said tips, and I said, how much tips do you make? He said, man, we make anywhere from $500 to $2,000 a night. What? So I'm 18, 19 at the time. I'm like, what? Say that again. He's like, yeah, sometimes I leave with like $1,000 cash. And I'm like, he said, so do you know how to, have you ever waited tables? I said, no, but I'll figure it out. And he said, okay, we'll come down, I'll see if I can get you an interview with the manager. And he got me an interview. I came down, talked to the manager, and Stephen, the manager, said, okay, yeah, you seem like a very bright kid. I'm gonna give you a chance. Why don't you come back tomorrow? So I'm thinking I'm gonna come back tomorrow, and he's going to maybe, give me some paperwork, start me on some training. I came back that next day, man, they had me on working, waiting tables. And it was a disaster.
You had no idea what to do.
Yes, people are asking for, cognac, and I'm bringing vodka. And, so I didn't know a thing. So, after that disaster, one of the employees was the bartender. She was actually a family member of the owner, and she said, I know this is something that you probably want to do. So if you want to do it and stay here, why don't you just come in like an hour or so early every day for about a week, and I'll train you. And so, I just took it as, an opportunity I just studied it like I was studying, for school. And I ended up working there throughout college and really got caught the bug of restaurants while being there. It was true. We made a lot of money. The money that he said and tips that he said we were going to make, we made that and then some. But then I also, fell in love with the food, talked to the chef a lot about some of the different dishes he was making, learned about the whole, front of the house. And so after I left, Howard in DC, I really started working in restaurants, waiting tables and then moved up to manager and then also teaching during the day. And then there was at one point I was talking to my father and he said, you're working almost 14 hours maybe a day.
Right.
Maybe you should figure out, try to do one or the other. And so it was a sign because at the time, the school I was working at, the principal came in and she gave me a counseling about, she didn't want me to teach. The kids were starting to learn and grasp it, but she didn't want me to teach in that way. She wanted me to teach more to the test. So then from that, I got discouraged. I said, you know what, maybe this is a sign. So I started going full time into restaurants and worked in a couple of concepts in LA and in the Bay Area. And then actually started working with Starbucks, and then from Starbucks led into a position and helping Magic Johnson Enterprise run his partnerships when he had Starbucks and Fridays in the theaters. But that whole time, Stephen, even during college, I'd always said to myself that I wanted to one day open my own restaurant, and so this was just preparing me for that. And then finally, when I had the chance to possibly open my own restaurant, and then it became a catering company, I said to myself, well, who's going to do the cooking? Like, I can't afford to hire, executive chefs. So I was like, I need to go to culinary school. So I went to culinary school and got some fundamental training and then moved from there.
Wow. So, you touched on this, that you'd actually at one point had a catering company of your own, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about some of the lessons that you learned from owning your own company.
So, one of the lessons I learned, Stephen, is being an entrepreneur is one of the hardest things that that I don't know about anybody else. But for me, looking back on it, and even now, having that entrepreneurial spirit, I would say that, sometimes, being an entrepreneur can be romanticized. And it is. And it was one of the, I've done some great things, and it's something that I truly love and I'm passionate about.
Right.
But it's extremely hard, and I don't think a lot of people talk about that enough.
It's a sexy thing that's in trend right now. But
it's a sexy thing. Yes. People want to hear about Mark Zuckerberg and all those.
I tell people all the time, Bryce. Parenting. I always share with new parents. I say, parenting is the hardest job in the world with no prior work experience.
Right.
And entrepreneurship is right next to it.
I would agree. Having done both, I would say, I would agree. I didn't come from a family. I came from a family of, people who worked. I had my mother and stepmother, were educators and worked in the school system. My father worked for the government, had aunts and uncles who worked for Ford. So I had some people who came from obviously strong work ethic, but they, usually most of them work for companies. I didn't have any exposure to any entrepreneurs. I had one uncle who actually had his own candy store in the front of his house. And he was also, now this is funny looking back on it, he was also like the loan shark or the broker of the neighborhood. Wow. So if somebody didn't have money, they could borrow some money from him to get their car fixed, et cetera. And, obviously I know now looking back now, I know he charged interest on it. Yep. That's how he made money. But I didn't have any, anybody that I was really close around when I was younger that was an entrepreneur. So I always tell people that it's one of the best things that I've done, and I truly enjoyed it. But I would say it's one of the hardest things, and one of the mistakes that I made. I had a mentor when I was starting my catering company who worked for a national food brand, and one of the things that I look back on, which he told me, but I didn't really pay attention to or didn't adhere to, is that he said, I think it would be important for you to get a partner or somebody that's going to help you along in this business. Like, try not to do everything on your own. Right. And so I was one of the mistakes that I think I made. I thought that, it wasn't that I was selfish. I just thought that, I could do it the best. I could, make it happen. And I think you can do that. Sometimes in the beginning, you're adrenaline, but after a while, that kind of wears thin, and you need to have somebody who's strong in other areas, or just somebody that can give you, where you can have relief in certain areas and that you can leverage their strengths and vice versa, as opposed to, because you're not going to do everything well. So for example, obviously, I'm a chef and I love to cook, and that was my passion, but I wasn't that strong in marketing. And a big thing and a big part of being an entrepreneur is selling yourself and selling your brand. And that takes a lot of time. So, balancing that combined with, the cooking piece and getting new clients and managing the day-to-day events, et cetera, it
Yes.
becomes a lot.
Our episode 45 guest, Kevin Turpin, said it best. You're only as good as your team, right?
Mm-hmm.
You really need to have some good people around you and be able to know when to delegate to those people and let go, right? It's very difficult to do it all by yourself.
And so now I've learned that lesson. I'm a huge advocate of that, and I also share that. The second thing I would say is that I underestimated how much capital was needed to get through that dry phase. I mean, when you're starting something off, obviously you have to build it up. So I think that I had some working capital, but I didn't have enough. So looking back on it, I was ready to jump. I'm a type of person that likes to jump,
right?
Which means that I learned. My mother told me when I was younger, she was an avid swimmer, and so she had taught me to swim since I was young. And one time when we went to the pool, I was standing around the deep end scared, and she said, "You know what to do. Just jump in." And so she tricked me and came back around and pushed me in the pool. And actually, it sounds cruel, but then I knew more than I thought I did. She was right there, and I started swimming, and she was like, "Sometimes you can stand on the edge forever, thinking and waiting for the perfect time, but sometimes you need to jump." So I take that sometimes in my life. I kind of take that on, a little too literal, and I'll jump.
Right.
And in the spirit of having, of action. And I think in looking back on that period, I could have, waited a little bit longer and raised and had a little bit more capital. But, it's all a great learning lesson. And it's something that, I try to share with other up and coming entrepreneurs or chefs and people that want to start catering companies or even companies, period. Anything that I've gone through, I try to share with them, so they can avoid those pitfalls and roadblocks.
Yes. Looking back now, what's one thing you wish that you had known or applied before starting your own business?
I wish I would have applied putting, not trying to be something for everybody. So understanding that obviously, I don't know if a lot of people may not know if they're not involved in food, but food, is in restaurants and catering, et cetera, is one of the hardest businesses out there.
It is.
One of the reasons is that the margins are very low. So I think that for me, having a catering company, a specialty catering company, and wanting to, for it to grow, I probably cast the net too wide, and I should have been more specific and targeted, people who actually, for lack of a better word, who could actually appreciate what my business was bringing to the table. So I'm not the type of business, or wasn't the type of business that if you just want food and you looking for cost and that's it, you want to pay $8 an hour, $8 a plate or $7 a plate, then you may need to go to McDonald's or Costco or something like that.
Right.
So I think in the beginning, I kind of sold myself short, and I should have been more targeted towards those people who had a better appreciation for what my business brought to the table.
So, I understand today that you are really focused on this health and wellness, right? And do a lot of work in underserved communities. Tell us a little bit more about, what you're doing and why what you're doing is fulfilling some of your passion and your purpose as a chef.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that when you look at the statistics, or when I started to become a little bit closer and conscious of the statistics that were going on in underserved areas, like minorities, particularly Latino and African Americans, suffer like 3 to 4 times higher from preventable diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and stroke. And I started to, obviously doing the work that I did, started to see that, a lot of that, 80% of that is preventable. And a lot of it has to do with contributing to, food and diet.
Right.
And what people were putting in their bodies. And as a chef, being, I think of myself as one of the gatekeepers of food, I had an opportunity to be a part of changing that tradition in the communities. And so once I started to look at it from that perspective, it started to become even clearer that, I had a job to do, and that, if I knew, some of, and I was educated on the different foods and different diseases that people are suffering from and how they contribute, then I could help people, change that. So once that became clear, I was like, that has to be my work. because I want my work to be something that, is a legacy that helps to really impact people's lives. So when you look at, I work with kids, I have a story of, I have so many stories, but one of the things that your question reminded me of, I was just at a school like 3 or 4 months ago, and I started talking about heart disease and being the number one cause of death in the United States. And one of the little girls, so this is a grade, about 4th or 5th grade, and one of the little girls, she just busted out crying.
Wow.
So I didn't see, I thought maybe one of the kids said something to her and, was teasing her or something like that. So, at the end of the class, one of the coordinators was in the class. He kind of walked her out. And then so at the end of the class, he said, her father just had a heart attack like a month ago. And a massive heart attack at like 36 and died.
Wow.
And so, when you started talking about heart disease and it being the number one killer and, of people in the world and in the United States, obviously it touched a nerve. And, it wasn't anything bad that you said. It's just something that obviously, she was really close to her father. And, that touched a nerve with her. So, but her mother wanted her to be in this class, for that reason. And so when you think about, things like that.
I got real for you real quick.
Right?
Oh my gosh.
And so I have a lot of stories like that. So when I think about, a lot of times people don't think about what's going to happen if they're as parents or, guardians, et cetera. You don't think about what kind of impact if you leave here or if you get disabled because of a preventable disease, et cetera, what kind of impact that's going to have on your kids or nieces or nephews, et cetera. So I started to look at it, from that, if I can prevent that from happening to, someone, then, that's my job has been done. And I've actually had 3 people in my family that have suffered from stroke and heart attack. So, I had an uncle when I was younger who helped raise me, and he had 2 strokes. And I remember at the time when he came back home from his first stroke, I was sitting at the table and my aunt would say, okay, help your uncle, learn how to write his letters again or learn how to pick up his spoon and fork. And so I thought it was normal at the time. I'm 8, 9 years old. But now, as an adult, I know that, that isn't normal. And that's something that, unfortunately, too many people in our communities, suffer from.
Wow. Bryce, you just hit a chord for me, man. That's like a wake-up call right there. I'm curious, before we talked about this, you were talking about the catering company. Was health and wellness important to you before and kind of led to that being your focus?
That's a great question. It kind of came about in my journey for having a catering company. So I grew up playing sports. I was always, pretty active and continue to be active. But I would probably say I never had anybody, talk to me about my diet when I was playing sports or even after. And so I had a somewhat, I had an okay IQ of health and wellness. And when I started my catering company, I didn't want it, I had, healthier options, and it was a lighter Southern cuisine. It wasn't as heavy food. But what happened actually is that I started pitching my business to different people. And one of my clients was a director of health for the Urban League. And then I did I catered a breakfast for them. And then she wanted me to stay one time and meet some of the other people that were in the collaborative. And one of them happened to actually work for American Heart Association. So I started doing some catering, some healthy catering for American Heart Association. And then through that, I actually met a young lady who said, who's actually my manager now. And she said, we have gardens where we teach kids and families and communities, underserved communities, where food comes from and the importance of eating fresh whole food. And I'd like to have you maybe do a couple of demos to because when the food is harvested, people are excited, but they're like, so this is an eggplant. Like, what do I do with eggplant? I don't know anything about eggplant. So we like to have a chef come in and kind of show people how to actually make healthy recipes. So I did a couple of those. And then from there, around the same time, we contacted each other, and I said, you know what, this could be your second kind of sister program. So if you're teaching kids, how to grow food and where food comes from, the next phase is teaching them how to cook it healthy and the importance of, putting fresh whole food in your body. Right. And she said, you know what, we're thinking of a couple things. Let me get back to you when we get some funding. And then, like maybe 6 months or 8 months later, she said, we have funding for a program and we want to hire our first ever full-time chef for American Heart Association to actually run this program across Los Angeles and Long Beach area.
Yeah, nice.
So it all came about at the same time. And then I actually had I have hypertension and high blood pressure in my family. So I started to look at it like, okay, this is an opportunity for me to really change some people's lives. I look at food. I look at, food and being a chef is my gift. But I feel like my purpose is to really, impact people's health and change some of the legacy and tradition, in the communities and people's families. And, food is just that vehicle and tool to do that.
Yes.
But I think it's larger than that. Because I was telling you about that story with the young lady. Unfortunately, I got a lot of kids. I work with kids as young as 9 years old that said to me that they had high blood pressure.
What?
So, yes, little boys and girls said, "Yeah, I'm managing my high blood pressure." I'm like, "You managing high blood pressure?" And they saying it. They're saying it like just normal, because so many. And then when I ask kids to raise their hand, first day of class, I always ask them, raise your hand if you got anybody in your family or if you've heard of heart disease or stroke. Maybe 80%. Raise your hand if you got anybody in your family that has diabetes or you heard of diabetes. Probably like 95 to 100% of the kids.
What?
Yes, indeed. So, it's
wow, Bryce, that's real. That's
it's real. It's real. And we all have our talents and blessings. So it's something that obviously I'm around these communities and around these kids, and I'm in the community every day. So it's something that I'm aware of. But I realize just like anything that you do, you're in the podcast world, so you probably have privy to information on what's going on in that world, and a lot of people aren't. So I look at it the same way. Like I'm privy to a lot of things that are going on in the community as it pertains to people's health and wellness that a lot of people may not be aware of. So it's my job to kind of, obviously make people conscious and, hopefully, they'll make some changes or help, be a part of the change in the communities.
Bryce, I'm so happy that you are on this podcast and that you're sharing this wisdom with us as a community. I just wish you weren't doing it right before Christmas food, man.
Hey, look, I tell people, man, it's about moderation and, just being conscious of what you're doing.
Right.
And, a lot of times, people aren't even conscious. So I think, there's phases, right? So, you can be aware of something, but not really be educated about it. So there's different levels. So I'm trying to make people aware, and then they become educated. And from being educated, hopefully they'll, think about making some change. And then from there, they'll actually execute that change. But I know that, change takes time. But I always tell people, and, kids, and also tell parents and people that I work with in the community, it's not about being perfect. It's about progress.
Yes.
So don't let, a lot of times people talk themselves out of stuff mentally before they even try. So just take one step and start with that one step and then build upon that.
And I think you're taking the right approach. At the end of the day, all too often, it's sometimes hard because we as adults, we already have our habits ingrained.
Yes.
But, you're leading through our children.
Yes.
You're taking the approach through our kids. And if you can rewire their mindset, they have a way to rewire the way the whole house works.
Yes.
In some cases.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned that, Stephen.
That's real.
Because a lot of times, no, I'm glad. That's a great point because a lot of, sometimes, some of the, people, or I would say critics, they would say, well, you got to have the parents involved and for the kids to change. And I always say, yes, ideally you would want the whole household to be involved. But a lot of times in my classes, they're after school, parents are working, et cetera. So what I've told them is that I've seen that if kids are enthusiastic and excited and want to make the change, then they can impact and influence the whole household. I had a principal tell me, you know what, two of my kids would, a parent came up here and two of her kids were in one of your classes. And one of the things the parent wanted to share with me is that she said her kids, for some reason, over the last couple of years, they have not gotten along and they argue all the time. She said, but when they took that class, now they come home and they make smoothies together.
Wow.
Together. And she's like, they got, the parent was like, they got me drinking some kind of smoothie with kale and apples and something else they've been making for 2 weeks and telling me I need to throw out X, Y, and Z. So, you never know, what somebody or what kid is going to gravitate to something. But I've seen it where, kids can have, just like they'll be excited to go to McDonald's, they can be excited about drinking a kale smoothie if it's something that, they're passionate about, and they can influence that household. So I think, it's something that I have to share. And also I want parents to kind of look at it. And, sometimes as parents, we can be somewhat, I guess, for lack of a better word, selfish and not think about how our behaviors are going to impact, our kids and the people that love us. We want to do what we want to do because we're adults, but I've seen the impact that can have on a household, if you leave here, earlier than you should have because of, a preventable disease.
Bryce, as I listen to you talk, I am reminded of so many different guests who have shared a desire to do something either in arts or, a technical skills, pursue a technical skill that they have. And here you're talking about something that wasn't necessarily, a passion of yours from a kid to become a chef, but you've embraced it, you pursued it. It's become a passion of yours. I can hear it in, what you're trying to do through your profession. Right. And, I just want to encourage those listening, especially those who are parents like myself. Listen to kind of what you've been able to do and the impact you're having and the legacy work that you have ahead of you. That God has blessed you with this skill and this pursuit. And, I just want to encourage people, that are listening to allow your kids and allow yourselves as well to pursue something that, you might not necessarily think that it's going to have the impact of maybe another occupation that has the glam to it. But you can make it. You have made this something amazing. I'm the son of a chef, so
you did mention that.
I appreciate my dad for his amazing talent around food and around the arts. But I'm encouraged by a lot of what you're sharing, and so just felt it on my heart to kind of share that.
That was an excellent word, and I think to your point, Stephen, it can. I never looked at it like that, but it can be a testament to some people. I forgot I was having a conversation with, and they were kind of stunned because I hadn't seen them in a while, and they were like, "Well, when we grew up, you weren't cooking. You never mentioned the chef." And so what I said to them, I said, people can be gifted to do a lot of different things. I think sometimes we pigeonhole ourselves and think that you can only do one thing, or maybe your parents have influenced you and you can only do one thing in your lifetime, and that's it. And it's hard for people to perceive that you actually change courses and reinvent and do something else and have a gift in something else, because sometimes people kind of pigeonhole themselves and say, okay, this is what I'm doing, and that's all I can ever do.
Just tell him to come and meet Stephen Hart, because Bryce, my wife would tell you, I've reinvented myself
That's awesome.
a million times over, man. I have no business doing anything I've done in my career.
I love it.
And none of it was taught in college, So for anyone listening, learning doesn't stop at the end of college. Learning doesn't stop in school. You're always learning. You should always be pursuing, what's in your heart, right?
Always.
And making sure that meets the market where, you can command an income and a salary, but, something that you're passionate about. So, let's talk about your next step forward, right? I'm so excited for you. You've got your very own book coming out really soon, and it's titled Food, A Vehicle for Healing. And this is part 1, The Fruitful Journey, right?
Yes.
Bryce, tell me about what inspired you to actually author a book.
Stephen, I would say writing or putting together a book is something that was another challenging thing as well. And so it just kind of came, I don't want to say came naturally, just as the journey, as the path that I'm on. I had, obviously being a chef, and, a lot of people would say to me, hey, you should do a book. And it was more so, people see other books and they hear about chef and they think cookbook. And so it was more so that. And so, but and there's nothing wrong with that. And I may do a real, serious cookbook later on. But that didn't really speak to me because I've always been the kind of person that didn't like to do it just because everybody else was doing something. So, as I was, working with the kids and doing the work that I've done, I started to think to myself, what has really fulfilled me and what has really encouraged me? And it was the relationships and some of the stories that I just told you and some of the people that I've, become in contact with through my journey through food, the schools that I worked in, the teachers that I've been in contact with, also people in my family growing up. And so I just started to write stuff down or put voice notes in my phone as I was driving. And then one day, I said something just came, or God just spoke to me and was like, you should do a book, talk and tell stories about some of the impact that food has had in your life, whether people that you've impacted and the people that have impacted you. Wow. And do it through the art of storytelling. And then each story have a recipe attached to it. So it's really talking about, and then also what I've learned, is that, it really started to be a lot more conscious of and see is the connecting and healing spirit of food. Yes. Obviously from a physical standpoint, but just from a spiritual standpoint, just think about all the events and special times that you've had or conversations that you had around food. Like you can talk to somebody and they could tell you, like one of the things I hate to do is like if somebody tell me, oh, can you make this recipe? My mom used to make it. Because I know that even if your mom couldn't cook, just the whole connecting and the experience when you were little and the conversation your mom may have had, you thought that was the best dish in the world. And so that is connected and ingrained in your mind, just that whole experience. So I wanted to speak to people about that. One of the stories that I have in there is I share about, my mother, unfortunately, she suffered from a mental illness, bipolar disorder, and then it became, later became addiction to crack cocaine. Wow. And so our relationship deteriorated as I became a teenager and got into adulthood. And before she passed, we were able to, to mend our relationship somewhat. But it wasn't until I actually had a job working in a food ministry at a nonprofit that services homeless and people who are formerly addicted to drugs. And I worked in the kitchen with people who were all former addicts. And I started to talk to them and hear their stories about, how guilty they felt of all the people that they hurt and how they knew that no matter what words that they said or how sorry they said they were, it could never change, situations like stealing from their family members, not being there for a child's birthday. Right. And so they had this huge guilt and regret. And so when I heard it from that perspective, I kind of understood what my mother went through, because I had a little of resentment towards her because she never said that she was sorry. Right. And so I tell that story in this book to get people to understand that this is crazy. This is God, because this happened through food. This is us sitting there making food. I'm teaching them different recipes and us just having conversations and these guys opening up to me and sharing. And then for me, it finally giving me the forgiveness that I needed to give to my mother. So I wanted to share those type of stories in there. I got a story about a young girl who actually was bullied and, she was shy, and I did a garden to table project. And she was telling me a story about her little brother eating fast food and how she was trying to prevent him from doing that. And I told her, I said, why don't you get up there and share that story before we start the luncheon? And she said, no, I don't speak that well. I'm shy. I was bullied. I said, well, if you feel the spirit to do it, I'll be there to help you out. So I get up there and I'm getting ready to tell everybody what we're eating and what we got from the garden. And she says, oh, hold up, I have something to say. And so this girl gets up and she starts speaking and telling this story, right? She doesn't stutter. She doesn't, pause or anything. Like she just like a public speaker. Wow. Afterwards, the counselors of the school and the director of the school come up and say, this was a great luncheon. And I said, oh, yeah, I'm glad everybody enjoyed the food. She said, no. Do you understand what just happened? And I was like, what do you mean? She said, this young lady came to our school like 6 months ago, and she had her anxiety was so severe that we had 2 or 3 of our counselors who would walk her off the bus. And then we had 2.
And you got her to speak publicly.
It was sit in the class with her.
Oh, my gosh.
So for her to speak in front of there were, donors there and adults and some peers. For her to speak, and this girl's like 9, 10 years old. She's like, that's a miracle.
Wow.
So I just wanted to kind of share, some of those stories and share some of my recipes and do it through that way. So it finally came to me and, I just got consistent and, disciplined on, writing and, we're almost at the end. It'll be out by the time this comes out. The book will be out and it'll be available, on Amazon. And I hope it's just, a tool to not only, give some people some recipes, but I want it to be a tool to start conversation and also raise awareness for everything like we talked about, from mental illness to drug addiction to, anxiety. I have stories in there about, some of the people that, like I was telling you earlier, my family who have suffered from preventable diseases. So I wanted parents to kind of see the impact that can have. So, that's how I wanted the book to, it just kind of came about. Yes.
I am just going to speak it into existence. You have a hit book right there, my friend.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
No.
I hope so. But I just, wanted to be something that I wanted to share from my perspective, kind of my world, and, also, be able to give some people a tool to hopefully start conversations around some of those, serious issues. Like I was talking about mental health, drug addiction, forgiveness, right?
Yes.
That's a very difficult thing for a lot of folks. I'm saying, looking at it and looking at the legacy that you're leaving health wise and understanding that you can have an impact on your family and your kids if you don't do some things that, can keep you healthy. So I just wanted to be hopefully a conversation starter also be able to share some of my recipes.
That's it. That's so true. I mean, and that's the thing. We all connect to those things, right? We all connect through food. So, we already have a common connection. We all love food. But if we can have that conversation around these stories and connect to what's being shared, I'm so excited. I can't wait to get a copy of this book for myself.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I'm really excited about kind of the direction you've taken here, and probably bring you back for just a minute here before we begin to wrap up. I'd love for you to maybe share a couple pieces of advice, maybe 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would want to give someone who's maybe saying, I want to be an author and publish my own book. What would you tell them?
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that I would tell them, Stephen, is to get on a consistent writing schedule.
Right.
So what that means is that be disciplined. Like, even if you only write like 4 sentences, a paragraph, just get consistent and, spending that time. Maybe if you don't have time to write, you can use an app called Dragon where you can talk into it and it will dictate, what you've, said into it. So it'll type it out and then you can kind of look at it again. I would just say write, and don't even worry about grammar and all those other things. Just get into that consistent writing pattern.
Yeah.
That would be one thing. The other is that I would say do some research, midway through or even in the beginning, do some research on, publishing and books and then also marketing your book. Because one of the things that I learned, through the process, and we talked about marketing in the beginning and throughout this conversation, is that that's something that a lot of authors don't even think about because you get so wrapped up in the book. You don't think about, okay, what is going to be or who are you going to market to? What's going to be your strategy to get word of mouth about the book out? So I think those couple things, and then try to write with something that's going to speak to you and what you're passionate about. Because you're going to get people who are going to tell you and it's all, it's all love. Like some people, they just love, they like your work and respect what you do. And they feel like this is what you should do. But I have a huge admiration for people who, whether if, succeeds or fails, they actually do what speaks to them and is on their heart.
Right.
And they'll just do what everybody else tells them to do. I have a respect for that.
Bryce, I love it, man. Love this wisdom. I'd love to have you share, some of your treasured tools and resources with our listeners before we wrap up. So maybe if you could tell us, what's a book that you've read this year that's inspired you most?
So I'm reading so many different books, man. I got like 5 books that I have on hand, but I will tell you a book that I constantly go back to and I read it like every 6 months. And I think this will be something that will pour into your audience. It's called The Principles and Power of Vision by Dr. Miles Monroe. Rest in peace to him. He passed away, I think, a year and a half ago in a plane crash. But this is a book actually my wife gave me when I first started, my catering company. And it's something that I have marked up. I look back at it again. I tell people about it. I tell them to read it. I tell them, I think I told my cousin who's an entrepreneur, I probably tell him, did you get the book? Like every other month. Wow. Because he talks about, some of the obstacles and what vision is and some of the obstacles that you will, come across, trying to go after your vision. For instance, I always tell people and young people, especially, stop waiting for everybody to validate what God has put on your heart and the vision that he has given you. Wow. It's not for everybody to see. And so a lot of times people spend time trying to get other people to say, hey, yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. And obviously there are going to be people in your life that you trust, that you share with, and he talks about that as well. Yes. But sometimes people, trying to get people who have no significance at all in their life, trying to get them to validate what they getting ready to do. Right. Stop doing that. That's one of the books that, I read all the time and go back to and find something different. Tool wise, I think that for me, I love Facebook and I love Instagram because as an entrepreneur and someone who's, likes to share and give people, educate people on health and wellness and food, et cetera, I think that those tools, if you use them properly, they have, a huge impact.
Right.
And just think about it, like 10 to 15 years ago, you didn't have that. So you couldn't share that message as the way you can now with
That's
anybody
right.
and everybody throughout the world. So I think if they, if I use like a comic book analogy, if you use your powers, those powers for good and those tools for good, they can be extremely beneficial.
Right.
And I love music. And so I love Spotify as well, Pandora. And then, those are tools that I'm always using, especially when I'm cooking. I'm always listening to music. So
Nice.
Spotify is one of my favorites.
Love it. So Bryce, what's something small that you've done this month that you're proud of?
I actually started working with foster youth. So I actually cooked a lunch with like 4 young men who were in foster care.
Wow.
Teenagers. And because I previous to this, I started working with them. I did something small with them last year. And then I told one of the directors of the volunteer service, I said, I want to go to all your foster homes and I want to cook with the teens, because to what we were talking about earlier, I realized that, how connecting and healing food is. But what I heard, like when I did one event, is one of the kids was telling me like, I've never had a sit down dinner. I've never sat down and had dinner with family members or anything like that.
Wow.
I've been in foster care most of my life. So I actually, was finally able to make that happen. And it was just 4 young men. I had them help out because they thought that I was going to come in and do all the cooking. I said, no, we're going to do this together. And they helped out and they had pride in that. And then we sat down and we broke bread together. And we just talked about, some of the things they were going through as teenagers. So, I want to continue to do that over the next, year. And I think there's 10 foster homes. So I want to go to all the foster homes and do that with the young people. So I'm proud of that.
God bless you, man. That's awesome. Before we wrap up, I'd love to invite you to maybe share one action that all our aspiring trailblazers listening to this conversation should commit to this week to help them blaze their trail.
Yeah, thank you. I want them to commit. I want people to commit to following up with people. That what I find is that, and you may run into this as well. I'll meet people. I've spoken at different events, or I'll meet kids and they'll say, I want to do X, Y, and Z, or I want to do that. And I'll say, hey, give me a call and please, or email. And you never hear from them again. Right. And so I want people to understand that part of, making your goals and your dreams come to pass is that you have to be diligent and dedicated to following up and executing. Everybody loves the ideas and creating the ideas, and that's great. And that has a place. But then also making them happen means that you have to follow up and do things when you don't feel like it. Yes. So sometimes a lot of people wait to do things when they feel like it. And if that's the case, there's a lot of stuff that will never happen. Sometimes you just have to do, and then the feeling will follow, or it may not. So I want people, young people, particularly entrepreneurs or people trying to be entrepreneurs, to really commit to following up with people, returning phone calls, returning emails, texts, making it something that you're committed to. And, writing it down, putting it, whatever tool that you use to follow up, be committed to that. And you'll see how many doors potentially will open for you.
And that's not a pretty or sexy or attractive action step, but it is so real and to the point, and you're just #truth, man.
Exactly. You got to follow up.
I'm saying that is the real deal.
It's just something that I'm glad you asked that question, because I was just thinking, like, how many times it just happened to me. Like, I'll run into a young person and say, hey, weren't you supposed to call me like a month ago?
You know what?
I forgot. Okay, well.
I can say I'm guilty of the same thing, right? Where we all are, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's advice you could be giving to yourself,
Yeah, exactly.
But the fact that we're aware of it and we have to take those steps. A lot of what I've been doing with this podcast has not always been fun. But you those are the things that you have to do, right? To be able to realize the dreams being achieved, your goals being achieved. You have to take those actions. You have to follow, like you said, you have to follow up. You have to carry out certain tasks.
Yeah, you have. I guess, Stephen, in short, I guess that's just, learning the art of discipline, right?
Yes.
Because I know, I'm sure like there's times when you know, whatever you have to do for your podcast, I don't think that even though it's your passion, doesn't mean you always want to do it or feel like doing it.
Brother, I can tell you there are many days that I don't want to, you know, skip a football game or NBA game or, you know, time with my family but it's a sacrifice. It's a trade-off. And so absolutely. But Bryce, I just want to say thank you so very much for being our guest on the podcast. I started this call off by saying you're a very first chef on the podcast, but brother, you've retuned the mindset of those listening who may have a passion towards food or, you know, or saying, you know, I'd love to become a chef someday. Right, you have given them so much reason and value to that role, to that profession. And I couldn't say thank you enough, man, for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. And you're now a part of the Trailblazer family.
That's a great family to be a part of.
And so I want you to finish up by telling us how we can stay connected to you and how we can get involved with this upcoming book that hopefully will be out by the time this episode goes live.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I'm on Instagram at chef_Bryce, and then on Twitter at Chef Bryce, and that's Bryce. And then on Facebook, the same thing, Chef Bryce, Bryce. And so the book will be out on Amazon by the time this podcast airs, and you can just log on to chefbryce.com. And if you log on there and subscribe to, you know, our email list, I'm going to send you, you know, some tips every month. And then also there'll be information on, you know, getting the, you know, purchasing the book. But you can also just go to Amazon and put in Food, A Vehicle for Healing by Chef Bryce, and it should come up there as well. But I really appreciate the opportunity, and keep doing what you're doing, because, you know, you're changing people's lives as well. This information is powerful. I've been listening in the car, and I'm learning like, wow, man, how come I didn't know that? So I'm learning from everyone that's on here. Awesome. So I appreciate it.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Trailblazers podcast. I'll be posting links to all of today's book recommendations and links mentioned on our show notes page at tbpod.com. If today was your first time listening to the Trailblazers podcast, I just want to extend a warm Trailblazers welcome to you. We're so happy to have you here, and we encourage you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button in your favorite podcast app. Go ahead and browse through some of our past episodes to keep the knowledge flowing. If you're a fan of the podcast and today's content, and you're maybe already subscribed to the podcast, please continue to share and invite your friends, your family, or colleagues to listen to an episode that you think might impact them most. We believe that someone listening to these inspiring stories will be moved to make significant changes that will have generational impact for many others, both now and well into the future. Don't miss next week's episode. New episodes are released each and every Monday by about 5 a.m. Eastern. Trailblazers, jump off this podcast today. Go find a way to rise above, go way beyond, and keep blazing your trail. Cheers.